The level of human suffering that's going on in Gaza cannot be overstated. Let me bring it in close. Yes, it can.
And so I do find it kind of hard to like lecture a group of people who are going through so much. Like the level of human suffering that's being inflicted on the people of Gaza right now cannot be overstated. And so, you know, to lecture them about, I haven't even talked about the fact that like, dude, Israel has, feel however you feel. If you want to argue, I haven't been there. Stuff does get through the blockade. Okay, fine. This is a captive people, you know, that Israel has dominated since at least 1967.
All right. So he said a lot there. So I want to tease out a couple of things. But I asked my good friend ChatGPT. And if you ever use ChatGPT or a tool like it to actually get this sort of information, you have to be very clear in how you write your prompts because you could get some bad information. So here's my prompt. I want you to be able to see it. It says, excuse me, let me zoom out there. I'm sorry. It says, what ratio of civilian to combatant casualties in the what is the ratio of civilian to combatant casualties in the Israel-Hamas war? It says, verify your numbers from at least two sources. That's important that when you do this, that you try to do that. You tell it how many sources you want it to use. Do not guess. Believe it or not, it's important to include that little disclaimer. Then I want you to compare this ratio to other wars in the past century, especially if the war took place in an urban setting. Be thorough and take your time. Now, I emphasize that last part about especially if the war took place in an urban setting, because war that takes place in an urban setting, obviously there's more dense population there, so the civilian casualties in those situations are going to be even heightened. So it's kind of apples to oranges. It's kind of like if you try to compare a war that didn't take place in an urban setting and the civilian casualties that took place there versus one that did, those are apples to oranges comparisons because of the population density. So you have to be fair in how you assess this. So look at what the information says here. And there again, I'm not minimizing any civilian casualties. What I'm saying is when Dave Smith says that the level of human suffering in Hamas or in Gaza can hardly be overstated, he's lying. Because that's all he and others like him do is overstate it. It says, source A, Israel Liberal Research and John Spencer at West Point. It says, Israel estimates roughly 13,000 Hamas combatants killed, with total Palestinian deaths around 33,000. That puts the civilian to combatant death ratio at under 2 to 1, closer to 1 to 1.5, okay, as low as 1 to 1. So that's a pretty good ratio. John Spencer and others note that such a ratio is far lower than is typical in urban warfare and would represent among the most careful operations historically, right? And so the source here is the Jewish Virtual Library, Israel-Hamas War Casualties. Okay, now someone might say, well, this is biased information. So let's look at another source. It gives me Wikipedia information, which we have to take with a grain of salt. It says Wikipedia summary based on independent academics, Adam Gaffney and Michael Spaggett. It says Harvard's Adam Gaffney, May 2024, approximately 80% of Palestinian fatalities are civilians, with 7,000 combatants and 37,000 total deaths. Now, that's a significantly different ratio. Roughly a 4-to-1 ratio of civilians to combatants, i.e. civilians, approximately 80%. That number seems, we can take that with a grain of salt. It says Michael Spaggett similarly estimated 80% civilians in early August 2024 data set. Now that's from Wikipedia. There again, nobody ever cites Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is notoriously unreliable, but okay, fine. Source C. The site ratio analysis by centers like National Interest and JNS. It says, They cite ratios ranging from 1 to 1.5 to 1 to 4, with plausible numbers centering around 1 to 1 or 1 to 1.4, i.e., civilians slightly more than combatants. So that source is closer to the first number that we read. Okay. Consensus range. Estimate civilian shares range from up 50% to 80% of deaths. In ratio form, for every one combatant, deaths of 1 to 1.5 civilians, or equivalently, a civilian to combatant ratio of 1 to 1 up to 1 to 1.5 or 1.5 to 1. Academic estimates skew towards the higher side, 80% civilians, while Israeli estimates and military-centered analyses skew towards 60%. So you can decide which one you think is more plausible. Now the real important thing. How does this compare to 20th, 21st century urban wars? Urban warfare average. UN and scholarly estimates. UN Secretary General, in urban and populated warfare, roughly 90% of casualties are civilians, or 9 to 1 civilian to combatant ratio. Think about that. At the high end, if we take the high academic estimates, it's 4 to 1 of civilians to combatants. But urban warfare in the 20th and the 21st centuries is generally 9 to 1, so more than double the highest estimates. And if we take the lowest estimates, we're talking about 8-9 times the ratio. So when Dave Smith says it can hardly be overstated, yes, it can. The point is that in urban warfare, civilian casualties are almost completely unavoidable. And when you take into effect the fact that, which is a well-known fact, that Hamas, they intentionally put their civilians in harm's way. That's what they do. Let's look at another estimate. Uppsala conflict data. Urban scenarios historically yield 49 to 66% civilian share, but UN cases often around 90%. Again, that's Wikipedia, so we can take that with a grain of salt. Battle of Mosul. Approximately 9 to 11,000 civilians killed versus 3 to 5,000 ISIS fighters. Civilian to combatant ratio around 2.5 to 3 to 1. Okay, so still higher. Battle of Manila. 100,000 civilians killed versus 17,000 Japanese combatants. This is in 1945. Roughly 6 to 1 civilian to combatant ratio. First Chechen War, Battle of Grozny. Estimates of upwards of 25,000 to 30,000 civilians killed. Combatant numbers less clear, but ratio likely very high. Some comparisons put it at 3 to 1, greater than 3 to 1 or more. Part of nearly 90% civilian in urban conflict. Very high. Syria. 23,000 civilian deaths. Combatant numbers unclear, but estimate around 3.2 to 1. Vietnam. Civilian share overall around 46 to 67%. Ratio roughly 1.4 to 1 or 2 to 1 civilian combatants. So the bottom line is this. When we look at it, urban warfare, the UN estimates that urban warfare in urban settings, it's somewhere upwards of 9 to 1. And the Israel-Hamas war is orders of magnitude lower than that. And this idea that they're not overstating the death and the destruction that's happening in Gaza is a lie. They are overstating it, and they're overstating it on purpose. And this is why people like Dave Smith, this is why they get it wrong. And this is why, I hate to say, but it's so hard for me to have any real respect for the way they carry these things out. But let me know what your thoughts are. Have I misstated anything? Do you think I'm wrong? Make a comment in the comments below. If you're new to this channel, please like, share, subscribe, come on back, check out some of my other stuff. And until next time, friends, God bless you.